Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where every other week we host national thought leaders to discuss how spouses can partner to manage money and the home to live happier lives. April is Financial Literacy Month, and in this spirit, we are dedicating both April podcasts to teaching your children money lessons. Today, we will discuss why your child might be deprived of a class dedicated to personal finance. It's the class many of our listeners tell us they wish they had, and they don't want their kids to miss out on. Today, we will discuss why this continues to happen and what you can do about it. As context for the discussion, Christian is spending much of the month traveling the country, advocating with lawmakers to guarantee a personal finance class for every American student, something that I did in the past. Meanwhile, Dr. Ross teaches a personal finance class at the University of Kentucky and advocates as a board member for the Financial Therapy Association. Enjoy the show. Christian, Dr. Ross, and I are going to flip the script. And this is going to be something special that we are going to do for Financial Literacy Month, which is April, because we believe that whether you're a parent, an uncle, an aunt, if you have some sort of relationship with youth in the United States, that you probably feel like us, and that kids should learn how to manage money, and that is a 21st century survival skill today that requires conversations and understanding where to turn for trustworthy resources. So in the next two podcasts, we're going to focus on two things. The first, which is today, is why your kids might not take personal finance, because there is momentum in this country that we see as just an avalanche of guarantees for kids to take the class. But unfortunately, not every kid is experiencing that. So we want to equip you as parents or aunts or uncles with what you need to advocate on behalf of your loved ones. And then the next podcast episode is going to be focused on what you can do to teach your own kids or your own relatives or loved ones about money. So without further ado, our facilitator today is going to be Dr. Ross, and he's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Brian. I'm actually really excited about this podcast. As you know, I deal with kind of financial literacy at the college level, but there's a lot that I don't know about K through 12. And I assume a lot of our listeners might be in that same boat. So I'm really excited to kind of learn a little bit more about this process as well. So I'm going to kick us off with a question to Christian here. Will you categorize personal finance education into three buckets so our listeners can really better understand what a personal finance education really means?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, this is just going to focus on high school financial education for now. The reason being, it turns out that the most impactful time for young people to take a personal finance course is right before they're about to actually use the lessons from the course.
That makes sense.
It's a research theory known as just-in-time education, not just in like the name Justin, but just in time. And so that's why all the research and stats that I'm going to share have to do with high school only. Not that it's not valuable for younger kids to be learning about personal finance, just the most impactful kind of policy lever that we could have in the education world should focus on high school because of that research. So there are three main buckets of access, as you mentioned, to personal finance education. And this is all according to the 2022 State of Financial Education report from Next Gen Personal Finance, which is the nonprofit that I work for. By the time you're listening to this, these numbers may have shifted. The idea is that they have grown since the 2022 report, but let me give you a little bit of a background for where we were in the spring of 2022. And fingers crossed that these numbers have grown. So there are three main buckets. The first is what we call bronze standard, and that is schools will have a course that is related to personal finance. Maybe it's a math course, maybe it's a social studies course, maybe it's an intro to business course. in which the teacher is embedding some instruction in personal finance. So maybe you're teaching a family and consumer sciences course that is focused on, meal planning, and there's some budgeting included in there. You can embed a little bit of personal finance instruction around budgeting within that course. So that's bronze, kind of embedding it in another course. Next level up in access is what we call silver, using the Olympic medals analogy here. Silver standard schools have personal finance either as a standalone 1 semester long elective, or that standalone personal finance course is one course among a cluster of courses that can fulfill a graduation requirement. You see that most frequently in states like New Jersey currently. They have a clustered graduation requirement for personal finance where you can fulfill that requirement either by taking a personal finance course or a business course or an econ course. So not every kid is getting a full semester course in personal finance under that type of requirement. So we call that silver. Lastly, and what we're aiming for all high school students in the US to take the gold standard, the gold medal, and that is a standalone semester-long, at least, course in personal finance that is guaranteed for all students before they graduate from high school. That way, there's no chance that even a single student in the school could slip through the cracks and get less than a full semester of personal finance. To give you a sense of the numbers nationwide in 2022, again, fingers crossed that this has grown and you're looking at new numbers now, is about 1 in 4 US high schoolers was guaranteed at that gold standard level to take a semester-long personal finance course. An additional 50%, a little bit over 50%, had it as an elective or as a clustered requirement, like I mentioned in New Jersey. And then about 20% of students have it embedded in another course. That last 5%, we looked at high school course catalogs with Dr. Carly Urban out of Montana State University. About 5% of US high schoolers, their course catalogs mention absolutely nothing to do with personal finance whatsoever. So there are 5% of kids who are straight up missing out. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So it's a growing aspect of our education, but I mean, only 1 in 4 in that gold standard. We still have a long way to go.
Indeed.
Sounds like. All right. Well, Brian, I know that you've been in this personal finance education space in a variety of different ways, right? Mm-hmm. Can you share with us your light bulb moments where you knew that every kid had to take a personal finance class, that it was just imperative for their growth, their well-being, their development? And so I guess including in that, why parents should really want the same for their kids.
I want to go back to early in my career when it was in the first 3 or 4 years, the class had grown in popularity significantly.
So you were teaching at the time.
I should have prefaced it with that. So when I started to teach, I was a business education teacher that taught 6 different types of classes, and that class grew in popularity quickly to the point where the district made it a requirement because it was a slam dunk from one class to the calculation was 90% of the student population within a few years was taking it. And it got to the point where kids wanted to take, an advanced personal finance, which we called initially a personal finance 2, which that evolved into eventually 3 different classes, a class designated primarily for students of special needs. It was a class that I wrote with Chris Shannon, who was with NEFI and the Boston Fed, and with the National Disability Institute. And then a traditional semester-long class, which, as Christian would say, is a gold standard class. And then an honors class, a full 1-year class that was dual enrollment. So the students received college credit. And then I also embedded a unit of economics. And so the part, so you can imagine starting from 7 kids in one class to what I ended up having before I left, there was growth. And during that time, You would obviously see kids who were engaged, they cared. And I had a student who was in my personal finance 2 class. And this student was taking just numerous AP classes. I want to say at the time it was 5 AP classes plus mine. And he was a whiz kid, no issues
impressive.
whatsoever.
That's a lot of classes, a lot of APs.
Yeah, 5 APs at the same time. And it was, he had no problem with them. And I asked him, why are you in here? You aced the first one, you're in the club, the personal finance club we had. Why are you, in personal finance 2? And he just said, I'm just really tired of being poor. And it turns out this kid didn't have his own bed. He slept in a recliner, and he was just fighting to get out of it. And he wanted to get as much information as he could. And, it was at that moment that that everything became very personal to me, and that I was in one time, government affairs, and it was probably too personal because it was a fight. And it's really hard to sit across from the table and talk to people who want to deny kids like that kid a personal finance education. I see red. I see nothing but red. I just think to myself, why would you hurt a child? And so from that moment on, I just knew that it's something that all of our students needed, where I taught, and that I needed to be damn good at teaching it. And I knew that for them, it was not a class, it was a survival skill that they were using at that time in their life, opening bank accounts for the first times, IRAs, pulling credit reports, filing tax returns, things that they would not have done without the class. And that I wanted every kid across the country to be a part of that opportunity.
I think, Brian, you really highlight the personal in personal finance there. It is really something that really deeply affects, I think, all of us, like financial educators, that we do see our students struggling with these issues. We do see them wanting to learn, and not just wanting, but needing, because of their situations, because of how they're growing up. It highlights the need for this. And as you said, there can be controversies, there can be difficulties working with some of those legislators. So I want to jump back to Christian with that. And can you share some of the state-by-state progress in personal finance guarantees that we've had over the past maybe 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Brian, your passion is very, very evident. And that is, frankly, that multiplied by as many passionate educators and education-minded people as possible is what is driving this movement. So, gosh, look up to you, Brian. That's awesome. Your passion for this. So, fortunately, there are some, adults who wouldn't be making Brian see red, who are moving the ball forward on this in state legislatures and in state departments of education. Truly wonderful to witness, and in some fortunate cases, be a part of that progress happening. So I started NGPF 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now. And at the time, that was 2017, there were 5 states that guaranteed that all high school students in those states would graduate having taken a personal finance class. The original 5 were Alabama, Missouri, Tennessee, Utah, and Virginia. Over the past 5 years, added Ohio, Michigan, Rhode Island, North Carolina, Iowa, Nebraska, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Kansas, Michigan, and New Hampshire was the latest state to add this course as a graduation requirement.
Awesome.
Now, if I read this correctly, right now, as we are recording this in February, it'll go live in early April. There are 69 bills introduced in 19 states and that are also active. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's right. So there are, like I mentioned earlier, there are adults in the room who are really pushing for this actively. Now, of course, when a state lawmaker introduces a bill, sometimes it's not the most substantial thing. Like it's either a message that they're trying to send, or it's a vehicle for another bill. And so some of these bills will end up, just kind of pending in their committees, and they won't really go anywhere. However, in 2022, all of 2022, there were just over 70 bills introduced in 27 states. Some of those bills ended up passing, getting signed by the governors in those states, but already in early February, we're about to eclipse the number of bills introduced last year in 2023. So if that's any harbinger of the movement and the momentum behind this movement, it gives me a lot of hope. I believe that, well, you know what, I don't want to jinx it, but I believe a non-zero number of states are going to add this graduation requirement in 2023.
So I mean, Christian, Brian, you both actually talked a lot about the benefits of this having a personal finance education, but there's the other side of that coin, right? So Brian, can you share some of the research that highlights how kids are actually hurt by being deprived of any type of personal finance education, especially relative to those that do receive it?
As listeners, when I go through this, I want you to really think through what adults are doing by depriving kids a personal finance education. And the adults are doing this are not getting in the way because it's in the best interest of kids. It's because it's in their best interest. I want to be clear about that. Your kids are less likely to know the difference between a subsidized or unsubsidized loan. Your kids are less likely to start investing for retirement at an earlier age. Your kids are less likely to pay their credit card payments on time. Your kids are less likely to make payments for any bill on time. Your kids are more likely to carry a credit card balance that is higher. Your kids are less likely to pull a credit report. That is what is happening right now to your kids if they're not getting a personal finance education.
It's tragic. It's tragic. That's what it is. I can feel your passion. I can feel your emotion, and I'm getting riled up just thinking about that, as well as I see these kids transitioning even into college, and those that are fortunate enough to go to college and then take, personal finance classes with me, and seeing how they haven't received this education in the system. And so they've made the choices that financially affect them significantly, like taking out the wrong loans, not knowing the differences between grants and loans, for their college education. These have significant long-term impacts on their financial plans, their wealth building, their job security later on in life. A whole host of factors of just living if they're not getting this information early enough.
Absolutely.
So if they're not getting it, what are things that we can share with the parents that they can do with their children if they're not receiving this personal finance education?
Yeah. Well, there are, in my opinion, there's kind of two branches on this particular tree that we can walk out on. The first branch has to do with, advocating, fighting for this in local schools and school districts, as well as at the state level. So I'll get into that in a second. And then the second branch has to do with tools and resources that are accessible for parents to teach their kids at home about personal finance, even if the parent themselves didn't learn personal finance in school, because back when they were in school, their school didn't require it.
So they can learn too, as they're teaching their kids. That's good.
And that's a really cool one of the unique things about a personal finance class, in addition to all the practical financial benefits it has for young people that deep into their lives that Brian outlined, is there's a multi-generational impact for this course. Kids who take the course are taking the lessons home, taking the templates home. I was just listening this afternoon to testimony from a student in the Vermont Education Committee. This student was, bringing a lot of courage to testify in front of this lofty group of lawmakers. And she was talking about how the templates the budgeting templates that her teacher shared with her in her personal finance class, she brought those home to her mom, who doesn't speak English. She translated the budgeting templates for her mom,
Oh, wow.
who now uses them in her personal, to manage her own personal finances. So this
so cool.
has that ripple effect on parents. I know you didn't ask about that, but that gets me.
That's awesome.
It's we can transform communities, families, people, our loved ones. We can help transform their lives through this too. Not that it's a panacea, but Anyway, so if you want more of that happening in your local schools, there are some resources out there for you. I have personally written a bunch of these resources that I'm always, shamelessly promoting. And so if you go to our website, ngpf.org, there's a section, Join Our Mission. And there's a whole resource toolkit. Actually, Brian wrote much of this as well, for teachers, but also parents to advocate for starting a personal finance elective. Or if it's already an elective and you want to take it to that gold standard level, advocating to the district administrators, hey, we ought to make this a graduation requirement.
Awesome.
So, Brian, as you're scrolling on your screen, and then for the folks who are listening to this podcast episode, we've got some, stats and testimonials on why this is so important to do, but then we've also got tools to make it happen. So if you scroll a bit further down, you see that orange button there, Brian, take me to the next step. That's the one. Then it will open up our kind of toolkit for how to expand access in your local school. So the tools that I'm specifically thinking of for advocating, and parents can use these as well as teachers, is it's under number 2 there, launch a personal finance elective. So we've done all the dirty work for you. So from, a letter going to the administrator, the course proposal template, even down to the nitty gritty details, like what are you going to name the course? Is it going to be something snazzy like Adulting 101, or is it going to be Spanish issue, personal finance? The syllabus, the standards that most personal finance courses are aligned to, like we've all got that already all compiled for you.
Awesome.
So we're trying to take the workload off of you. And then the second branch is what you can teach at home. And I know in part 2 of this series, that's what we're going to get into, right, Brian and Dr. Ross?
Yeah.
So I'll tease this part 2 of the podcast.
Yes. I'll ask you a lot of in-depth questions about the money lessons we can teach our kids.
Perfect.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Well, as we finish up, I know you both have been in this area for a while now. You've been lobbying hard. You're clearly both passionate. But Brian, let's end with your favorite story in successfully lobbying for a personal finance course as a semester-long graduation requirement.
So there was a group of us who worked nearly a decade to get this passed in Ohio, and there were
It's a long time.
It was a lot of trips to Columbus, and there were 2 failed attempts that preceded the successful legislation. And the senator who sponsored the legislation is Senator Wilson, and I cannot say enough great things about him as a man, as a human being. You learn a lot when you are behind closed doors, and what mattered to him was what was right for kids. And he promised from the beginning, when he was meeting with a very small group of us, that he would put kids first, and that we could tell him, if this just cannot fly, that he would stick to it. And because he knew, he was a lawmaker, but he wasn't in the education world, and he stuck to it. And to find a human being like that serves in government just gives you hope for us. So as you can imagine, there's always resistance, and the best way to describe it is this: I have never ever heard somebody say that a kid should not take personal finance, ever, even by the people that are sitting across from me. What they are going to do is they are going to, rather than look at it from the perspective of what is right for a child and build a school system around that, they will look at it as what is right for an administrator and build a school system around that, and hope that the kids can find their way into their thoughts. And so the challenge was fighting that type of resistance in an education system that doesn't evolve as fast as our financial world. And I asked the senator if we could bring up some of my students for what's called an IP meeting. So these are kind of behind the doors where the stakeholders have conversations and negotiate. And he smiled. He said, yes, absolutely. Because again, he was there for the kids.
It's amazing.
And I asked that question because as I was sitting in that room and the adults were negotiating, every single time there was a compromise, what was compromised was the quality of the child's education. So adults were winning, kids were losing. And I was sick of watching it. And I felt like it would have been a lot harder to have those conversations when the kids themselves were in the room. And they came up, and if you've taught, you know what it's like to be around special kids. And for 15 years, I was around some kids like this every year. And it brought me into the classroom with energy and with passion because they inspired me. And these were 4 students who inspired me, and they shared their stories and how personal finance was important for them, and stories where adults in the room would have no idea that one kid was a ward of the court and needed the class because there was nowhere else to turn to do the basic things that they took for granted, or that another kid was so passionate about it, it became their college major, or another child who decided to go from one school to another that saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt. Because at the end of the day, despite the fact that one of those schools was their dream school, they knew that practically speaking, that choice would have ruined the rest of their life. And when the adults in the room recognized that this was real, this wasn't a math problem that somebody would grade and give back, that these were singular decisions that had compounding consequences on the rest of their lives, and they got to see those lives in front of them, it changed the course of the conversation. And I would encourage parents who are out there, or aunts or uncles, if you want to meet with an administrator in your school or in your district to do this, bring the kids. Bring the kids, because they are the ones who want this. Imagine that. I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't the one that was like, I can't wait till Monday. I'm so sad it's Friday. I was always like, nobody gets up at Monday morning and they're like, I can't wait to go to school. Maybe Christian and definitely his wife, Dr. Heyman, but not me. That's for sure. But yet these kids were like, you know what? It's different with this class. I need this class. So I just want to I want our listeners to walk away realizing that the power is in their hands to make sure that the children that they love don't miss out on the kind of class that can change the direction of their lives.
Oh, wow. What a great story. I do want to thank Brian, Christian, thank you for sharing all this information, all these great tips that we can use, and just all the progress that we have made in our financial literacy and financial education programming, but all the progress that we still have to make and the ways that we can go forward with doing that. And so make sure you check out all the links that Brian's going to post as well, so that you can be an advocate within your own community. You know, a rising tide brings up all ships, right? So we want to do that for our children.
Christian, Dr. Ross, and I thank our listeners and our guest. Please be sure to go to modernhusbands.com, where you can subscribe to our podcast. You can listen to our podcast in whatever platform you prefer: Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or even on YouTube. Until next time, be well.